In Abadir, people always admired Neka whenever she walked through the marketplace in her flowing Ankara gown and gentle smile. To the neighbors she was the woman who had everything, a rich husband, a big house, and a life many could only dream of. But what no one knew was that behind the tall gates of their mansion, Neka lived in silence and fear. Her husband, Obinna, was respected in public, a successful businessman with charm that fooled everyone. Yet at home his temper was like fire waiting to burn. A single word, a small mistake, even the way Neka breathed could set him off. Nights were the hardest. The laughter from the streets faded, and the walls of the house carried the sound of Obinna's anger. Neka often pressed her back against the cold tiles of her room, wiping tears before anyone could see. She learned how to smile outside and hide her bruises under long sleeves and headscarves. Every time people said, "Neka is so blessed," her heart broke a little more. She wished they could see the truth, that blessings don't always shine in gold, and sometimes the most beautiful home can be the darkest prison. Do you want me to continue the next part too? The breaking point, 250 to 300 words. In the same emotional viral style? The rain beat hard against the mansion windows that night, the sound mixing with Obinna's booming voice as he shouted through the living room. Neka stood quietly, her hands trembling, trying to explain something so small, so harmless, yet it had become the spark to his rage. "You dare talk back to me?" he roared, his eyes sharp with fury. Before she could step away, his hand clamped tightly around her arm. With a force that stole her breath, Obinna dragged her across the cold marble floor. The smooth surface bruised her skin as her wrapper loosened, and the pain shot through her body, but what hurt most was the shame. Around them Obinna's relatives sat frozen. His brothers, his cousins, even his elderly aunt, people who could have stopped him, looked away, their silence louder than thunder. Some sipped their drinks nervously, others pretended to be focused on the storm outside. No one moved to defend her. To them it was a family matter, not their place to interfere. Neka's cries echoed through the vast room, but Obinna only tightened his grip, his anger swallowing any trace of mercy. "You belong to me," he shouted, dragging her until her knees scraped and her headscarf slipped from her hair. In that moment, Neka's heart broke in a way it never had before. It wasn't just the pain of being pulled across the floor like she was nothing. It was the realization that the people around her, people who called her sister and daughter-in-law, would rather protect Obinna's pride than her dignity. She caught sight of their teenage daughter Amarachi standing quietly in the corner, her eyes wide, her small fists clenched. And though Neka's body was weak, her spirit whispered one thing: let this child never forget what she saw tonight. Would you like me to now expand 3? The Silent Witness, 300 to 350 words. With the same viral emotional style? Amarachi stood frozen in the corner of the living room, her bare feet pressed against the cold marble tiles. The storm outside rattled the windows, but nothing was louder than the pounding of her heart. She was only 15, still a child in so many ways, yet what her eyes were forced to see that night would never leave her. Her small hands shook uncontrollably as she clutched the edge of her skirt, but her eyes were burning, hot with a mixture of fear and anger. She wanted to scream, to beg her father to stop, to run to her mother and pull her away from his grip, but her voice felt trapped in her throat, swallowed by the heavy silence of the relatives who sat like statues, pretending not to see the cruelty before them. Amarachi's gaze locked on her mother. She saw the pain in Neka's face, the tears slipping silently down her cheeks as she struggled against Obinna's hold. In that instant, Amarachi felt something snap inside her chest. She wasn't just watching her mother being dragged across the floor. She was watching the woman who cooked her meals, braided her hair, whispered prayers over her bed every night, being humiliated like she was less than human. Her nails dug into her palms as a promise formed in her young heart. She whispered it to herself so softly no one could hear. One day I will make him regret this. One day Mama will stand tall again. The fire of that vow lit her from the inside, replacing her helplessness with a strange strength she couldn't explain. As Obinna finally released Neka and stormed out, Amarachi rushed to her mother's side, dropping to her knees, wrapping her small arms around her. Neka could barely speak, but when their eyes met, both mother and daughter knew something had changed forever. That night did not just scar them. It planted the seed of a fight that would one day shake the world. Do you want me to continue with 4? The Unspoken Bond, 300 to 350 words. in the same emotional viral style? That night, after the storm had quieted and the house had fallen into its usual heavy silence, Nneka sat on the edge of her daughter's bed. Her wrapper was torn, her knees ached from the cold floor, and her spirit felt as though it had been crushed under Obina's hand. She thought Amarachi was asleep, but the girl's eyes were wide open, glistening with unshed tears. Without a word, Amarachi crawled closer and wrapped her arms around her mother, holding her as if she was the protector instead of the child. "Mama," she whispered, her voice trembling but steady with conviction. "One day they will regret this. I promise." Nneka's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to tell her daughter not to speak such heavy words, not to carry the weight of her pain. But when she looked into Amarachi's determined eyes, she felt a flicker of something she had not felt in years: hope. Her tears spilled freely, soaking into Amarachi's shoulder, but for the first time, those tears did not fall from despair alone. They carried a small seed of belief that maybe, just maybe, her daughter would rise higher than the chains that bound her. The two of them stayed like that for a long time, holding each other tightly in the dim light of the small lamp. The bond between them, already strong, deepened that night into something unbreakable. Amarachi was no longer just Nneka's child. She had become her silent defender, her secret strength. In that fragile moment, Nneka realized that though the world might not fight for her, her daughter would. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the air fresh and calm. But inside that little room, a vow had been planted. It was a vow born from pain, carried on love and destined to change everything. Amarachi's arms around her mother felt like a shield, and for the first time in years, Nneka allowed herself to close her eyes and believe in tomorrow. "Do you want me to continue with 5?" The daughter's resolve, 350 to 400 words, in the same deeply emotional and, from that night onward, Amarachi was no longer the same girl. Something inside her had changed. While other teenagers her age spent evenings gossiping or scrolling on their phones, Amarachi buried herself in her books. She stayed up late, her small lamp glowing in the corner, flipping through pages until her eyes stung with tiredness. She knew that her father's anger and cruelty were too big for her fists, too strong for her tears. The only weapon she could hold against him was her success. At school, she stopped waiting to be called the best. She demanded it with her hard work. Teachers noticed the shift. "This girl," they often whispered, "she is going somewhere far." She solved problems with speed, answered questions with confidence, and wrote essays that made her classmates stare in awe. Even when exhaustion pulled at her body, she reminded herself of her mother's face on that cold marble floor. That memory fueled her like fire. At home she worked smarter. She found small jobs tutoring younger students, saving coins carefully, hiding the money in a little box under her bed. She dreamed bigger than the mansion that had become a prison. She saw herself in tall glass offices, standing before crowds, her name spoken with respect. Every day she whispered to herself, "One day Mama will smile because of me. One day, Papa will bow his head." Her mother, Nneka, became her quiet partner. She slipped her extra market earnings into Amarachi's school bag, disguised as pocket money. She cooked late-night meals when Amarachi studied until dawn. Sometimes she would place her hand gently on her daughter's head and whisper, "God is watching. Keep going, my child." And Amarachi would nod, determination shining in her young eyes. In a house filled with silence and fear, Amarachi created her own world of vision and strength. She was no longer just surviving, she was building a future. A future where her mother's pain would not be the final story, but the beginning of their victo. Nneka lived 2 lives. By day, she was the quiet wife in the mansion, moving carefully so as not to stir Obina's temper. But behind closed doors she carried a different strength, one that no one, not even her husband, could crush. In the early hours of the morning, while the house was still asleep, she would sit by the window with beads, fabrics, and raffia spread across her lap. With patient fingers she wove bracelets, necklaces, and little hand purses. Every stitch carried her silent prayers for Amarachi's future. When Obina left for his endless meetings and the relatives busied themselves with gossip, Nneka would slip out quietly. She wrapped her crafts in a small cloth bag and made her way to the bustling market of Abadir. There she sat among other women, blending in with the noise and chatter. To strangers she was just another market woman, smiling gently as she bargained with buyers. No one knew that the woman who sold simple trinkets was the same one who lived in a mansion uptown. Every coin she earned was hidden carefully, sometimes in the folds of her wrapper, sometimes under loose tiles in her room. And when Amarachi needed school books, uniforms, or exam fees, Neka would pass her the money in secret, pressing it into her daughter's palm with a whisper, "Don't let anyone know." Amarachi always held her tightly in return, knowing her mother was risking everything just to keep her dream alive. There were days when Obina asked questions, why Amarachi always had what she needed, how bills were being paid. Neka would smile softly, her voice steady though her heart raced, "God provides." And Obina, too distracted by his own affairs, never looked deeper. It was a dangerous game, but Neka played it with courage. For her, every small bracelet sold was not just an item. It was another brick laid in the path of her daughter's destiny. Though she lived in fear, she chose to fight quietly in the only way she knew how. And in that secret fight, years passed, and the timid teenager who once watched her mother suffer in silence transformed into a powerful young woman. Amarachi grew tall and graceful, her beauty shining in the bright Ankara gown she wore with pride. But more than her looks, it was her brilliance that made people turn their heads. She walked across the stage on graduation day with her head held high, clutching her certificate as the crowd roared with applause. She had not only graduated with top honors, she had broken records that few thought possible. But Amarachi was not satisfied with just being the best in school. She dreamed bigger. She wanted to create something that would change lives. With the little savings she and her mother had guarded for years, she started a small tech idea in her bedroom. Day after day she worked on it, coding late into the night, writing plans, sending proposals. First, no one believed in her. Some laughed, saying, "She is just a girl, she will give up soon." But Amarachi didn't stop. She worked harder, knocking on every door, attending every pitch competition, and refusing to be ignored. Slowly, her company grew. What began as a simple idea turned into a movement. Investors noticed her. Young people followed her story. Newspapers began calling her the young queen of innovation, and her face appeared on magazine covers. Within a few short years, Amarachi's company expanded across cities, providing jobs, creating opportunities, and inspiring thousands of girls to believe they too could rise. Through it all, she never forgot the nights of tears, the secret sacrifices of her mother, and the vow she made as a frightened child. Every boardroom she entered, every deal she signed, every spotlight that shone on her, Amarachi carried her mother's face in her heart. Her success was not just her own. It was a crown she was building for Neka piece by piece. Do you want me to continue with 8? The World Takes Notice, 350 to 400 words. In the same style? Soon Amarachi's name was everywhere. What started as whispers in classrooms and small tech events became headlines on national television. Her face appeared on glossy magazine covers, her confident smile framed by bold Ankara gowns that made her stand out in every crowd. Journalists called her the young queen of innovation. Television hosts invited her onto their shows, asking her how she turned a small bedroom idea into a company that was now employing hundreds of young people across the country. Everywhere she went, people wanted to hear her story. Children pointed at billboards with her picture and said, "That's Amarachi." Mothers told their daughters, "Study hard so you can be like her." Even government officials who once ignored her now quoted her words at conferences. She had become more than a businesswoman. She was a symbol of hope. Investors began to line up at her door. Her office, once just a tiny rented space with old chairs, now buzzed with meetings, proposals, and opportunities. Men in suits who once dismissed her now begged for partnerships. Big international companies flew her out to speak at events, offering deals that would make her company expand beyond borders. Amarachi handled it all with grace, her calm voice and sharp mind winning over even the toughest skeptics. But behind her success was a quiet truth. Every time the cameras flashed, every time the applause filled the room, Amarachi thought of her mother. She remembered the bruises hidden under long sleeves, the nights of whispered promises, the little bracelets sold in the market to keep her dreams alive. She often told interviewers, "My greatest inspiration is my mother." And though the world clapped, they could never truly understand the depth of those words. The world had taken notice of Amarachi, but what they didn't know was that the real crown was still waiting, for the woman who suffered silently so her daughter could shine. Do you want me to continue with 9? The Fall of Obin. While Amarachi's name was rising high in the sky, Obina's was sinking fast. The man who once walked through Abadir with his chest out and his voice loud was now shrinking under the weight of his own failures. His businesses, once the pride of the city, began to crumble one after the other. Contracts slipped through his fingers, partners withdrew, and lawsuits piled up. The empire he built on arrogance and control was eaten alive by debt. The same relatives who once sat in his living room, clapping for him and calling him the great provider, now refused to answer his calls. When he visited them, they spoke to him with pity instead of respect, whispering behind his back about how quickly a man can fall. Friends who once praised his wealth began to cross the street when they saw him coming. Even those who had once been silent when he dragged his wife across the floor now treated him as though he carried bad luck. Obina tried to hide his troubles at first, dressing sharply and forcing a smile at public gatherings, but inside he was drowning. Creditors knocked at his gate, his workers went unpaid, and the cars he once boasted about were sold quietly to cover debts. The mansion itself felt different. Its halls no longer echoed with pride, only emptiness. Late at night, Obina sat alone in the same chair where he once barked orders, staring at the walls. He thought of the respect he used to command, the fear he used to inspire. Now no one listened. No one cared. For the first time in his life, he tasted the same silence he had once forced upon his wife. It was bitter. It was heavy. And it was only the beginning of his downfall. Do you want me to now continue with 10? The return home, 350 to 400 words. In the same emotional and cinematic flow? The evening sky glowed with shades of gold and purple when Amarachi's car rolled slowly through the gates of the mansion. It was the same house where she had once hidden in corners, trembling at the sound of her father's voice. But this time the moment felt different. A sleek black car stopped in front of the entrance, and the chauffeur quickly stepped out to open the door. 2 bodyguards followed closely, their presence a clear sign of the power Amarachi now carried. She emerged gracefully, dressed in a flowing lace gown with Ankara details, her head wrapped in a regal geli that shimmered in the fading light. Every movement spoke of dignity, of a woman who had fought battles unseen and returned victorious. Neighbors peered through their windows, whispering in awe. Some even gathered at the gate, stunned to see the little girl they once pitied now arriving like royalty. Inside the house, Obina waited. His heart pounded as he heard the sound of cars outside. The man who once dragged his wife across this very floor now stood nervously, his suit wrinkled, his face lined with defeat. He tried to smile when Amarachi walked in, but the pride in his eyes was clouded by shame. The daughter he had ignored, the child he had silenced, now stood taller than he ever imagined. Amarachi walked into the living room slowly, her heels clicking against the same marble tiles that had once carried her mother's tears. She paused, her eyes scanning the place where her childhood pain had lived. Then she lifted her chin, every step echoing the promise she had made years ago. This was no longer her father's house. This was the stage where her victory would be seen. Do you want me to continue with 11? The Shattered Father, 350 to 400 words. In the same emotional and viral style? Obina stood stiffly in the living room, his hands clenched behind his back as though that would hide the trembling in his fingers. He forced a smile, stretching it too wide, hoping Amarachi would not notice the cracks in his pride. "My daughter," he said loudly, as if the sound of his voice could still carry the same authority it once did. But Amarachi's calm, confident presence made his words sound hollow. She did not rush to greet him. She did not bow her head as she used to. Instead, she walked in like she owned the space, her bodyguard standing respectfully behind her. Obina's chest tightened as he watched her take the seat of honor, the very chair he had once claimed as his throne. He saw the way people looked at her, the quiet respect in their eyes, the awe in their whispers. It was the kind of respect he used to demand but could never truly earn. For the first time, Obina felt small in his own house. The sight of his daughter commanding the moment cut into him deeply. This was the same girl he had silenced, the same child he once brushed aside as weak and unimportant. Now she was the center of power, the name on everyone's lips, the hope of the family he thought he controlled. His throat grew dry as he realized something he had never admitted before. He needed her. His debts, his losses, his broken reputation. Everything pointed to one truth. The daughter he had ignored, the one he had left to watch her mother suffer, had become his only lifeline. Without her, he was nothing but a man sinking in the ruins of his pride. Obinna tried to lift his chin, tried to hold on to the shadow of authority, but his eyes betrayed him. Beneath the forced smile, shame and desperation shone clearly. For the first time, the mighty father was no longer feared. He was broken, and it was his daughter's strength that shattered him. Do you want me to continue with 12? The daughter speaks 350 to 400 words. In the same emotional storytelling style? Amarachi sat tall in the chair, her regal lace gown glowing softly under the chandelier's light. The room was silent, the kind of silence that made every breath feel heavy. Relatives who had once turned their faces away now watched closely, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Obinna stood before her, trying to meet her gaze, but the weight of her presence pressed down on him. Slowly, Amarachi rose to her feet. Her head wrap shimmered, her posture was firm, and her voice carried a calm strength that silenced every whisper in the room. She looked her father directly in the eye, the same eyes that once terrified her, and spoke clearly. The day you dragged my mother across this very floor, I swore the world would know our story. And now they do. Gasps filled the air. Obinna's face drained of color. The relatives shifted again, some lowering their heads in shame. Amarachi's words did not tremble. They cut through the room like a blade. For years she had carried the memory of that night like a wound, and now, standing in the same place, she turned it into her weapon of truth. Obinna tried to open his mouth, perhaps to defend himself, but no words came. The power he once held was gone. All that remained was a man exposed, his cruelty dragged into the light by the very daughter he underestimated. Amarachi's voice softened, but her eyes remained sharp. You thought silence would protect you. You thought shame would bury Mama forever. But her pain became my fuel. Her tears became my drive. And today, the same world that once praised you now knows who you truly are. The room fell into a heavy hush. Obinna lowered his head, not because he wanted to, but because the truth forced him to. Amarachi had spoken, not as his daughter, but as the voice of every woman who had ever been silenced. Do you want me to continue with 13? The mother's crown, 350 to 400 words. In the same style? All eyes followed Amarachi as she turned slowly away from her father and walked toward her mother. Neka sat quietly in the corner of the room, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes lowered as if she still feared taking up space. For years she had learned to shrink, to hide her pain beneath smiles and silence. But tonight Amarachi would not let her mother hide anymore. With graceful steps, Amarachi reached for a diamond-studded wrapper her assistant carried forward. The fabric sparkled under the lights, glowing like something fit for royalty. She lifted it carefully and with steady hands, draped it across her mother's shoulders. Gasps filled the room as the simple woman who once sold handmade crafts in the market now sat wrapped in pure elegance. Mama, Amarachi said softly, her voice carrying across the hall, you are the true queen. You endured when others would have broken. You sacrificed when no one saw. You stayed strong so I could rise. Her words trembled with emotion, but her tone was steady, proud. Tears rolled freely down Neka's cheeks. She lifted her hand to touch the wrapper, her fingers brushing the glittering stones, hardly believing this moment was real. For years she had been treated as less than human, as though her worth ended at Obinna's approval. But tonight, in front of the same relatives who once ignored her cries, she was being crowned with honor by her own daughter. The room erupted in murmurs. Some clapped, some wiped their eyes, others simply stared, realizing they were witnessing a story that would be told for generations. Obinna looked on, frozen, watching as the woman he had humiliated was now exalted higher than him. Neka rose slowly, her wrapper shining, her tears falling. For the first time she did not bow her head. She stood tall, her back straight, and when she looked at Amarachi, her eyes held both pride and gratitude. That night the crown was not gold. It was love, resilience, and dignity restored. Do you want me to go? By the next morning, the photos of Amarachi draping the diamond-studded wrapper over her mother's shoulders had spread like wildfire. Social media buzzed with messages of awe and admiration. People from Abadir and beyond shared the images, each caption echoing the same sentiment. Courage, love, and justice had finally won. The story of the mother who endured in silence and the daughter who rose against cruelty touched hearts across the city, the country, and even neighboring regions. News outlets picked up the story, running features about Amarachi and Nneka. Journalists described the scene in vivid detail: the gleam of the rapper, the proud stance of the mother, and the calm yet fierce presence of the daughter. Opinion pieces celebrated Amarachi's bravery, praising her not just for her business success, but for standing up to a father who had once caused so much pain. Commenters wrote about how her story inspired them to stand strong, to protect those they loved, and to fight silently against injustice until the right moment came. Meanwhile, Obinna faced a wave of condemnation. People who had once respected him, admired his wealth, or sought his favor now criticized him openly. Social media posts, messages, and phone calls reminded him of every cruel action he had taken: dragging Nneka, humiliating her in front of relatives, and hiding behind false pride. The shame that had once been private was now public, and Obinna could feel the weight of it crushing him. Amid the attention and praise, Amarachi and Nneka stayed close. They read the messages together, tears of joy streaming down their faces. Amarachi whispered to her mother, "Mama, see? The world finally knows. Your strength, your patience, it mattered." Nneka smiled through her tears, feeling the long years of struggle and fear finally transform into recognition, honor, and love. That day, Abadir witnessed more than just a reunion. It witnessed the triumph of dignity over cruelty, love over fear, and courage. Long after the headlines faded and the cameras moved on, the story of Amarachi lived on in the hearts of many. Across Abadir and throughout Africa, people whispered her name with admiration. She was no longer just a young woman who had built a tech empire. She was the daughter who turned her mother's pain into power, the girl who refused to be silenced, the symbol of dignity and resilience. In schools, teachers told her story to inspire students. Young girls looked at her picture on posters and dreamed bigger than they ever had before. Parents spoke of her courage, reminding their children that even in the darkest moments, patience, love, and determination could change lives. Her tale became a legend not just because she succeeded, but because she had done it with grace, honor, and an unbreakable bond with her mother. Even years later, people in Abadir could recall the image of Amarachi draping the diamond-studded wrapper over Nneka's shoulders, the moment when silent suffering turned into triumph. Obinna, once feared and proud, remained a cautionary figure, a reminder that cruelty always leaves its mark, and that true strength often rises quietly, unseen, until the perfect moment to shine. Amarachi and Nneka continued to inspire, their story spreading like wildfire, teaching everyone who heard it that no matter how deep the pain, love, courage, and resilience could rewrite a life. Their legacy became timeless, a living proof that poetic justice is real, and that a daughter's love can change the world. Your full 4,000-word viral script is now complete. If you want, I can also format the entire script with cinematic scene directions, dialogue cues, and pacing notes to make it ready for production or storytelling. Do you want me to do that next?